If you're searching for tomorrow's cure, fighting for a breakthrough when all else is broken, or confronting the unthinkable, keep on. Keep on caring. Keep on learning. Keep on practicing, because at MDA National we'll be here, providing the care, protection and expertise so that you can keep on. MDA National.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the What's It Really Like to Be a GP webinar tonight. My name is Bennington. I'm the Australian Medical Association WA CEO, and joining me as my co-host tonight are Dr. Brittany Wexley, PMC WA JMO co-chair, and a member of AMA WA DIT committee, and Dr. Danushka Fernando, Deputy Chair of the PMC WA JMO Forum, St John of God Midland Aramo Society President, and AMA Liaison Officer. Before we introduce our speakers and we begin our presentations, I'd just like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, the traditional owners of the country that we meet on, their elders past, present and emerging, and their AMAs, and all our responsibility to help close the gap. I'd like to thank PMC WA tonight, who have partnered with us, our presenters, organisations including WAGPET, that's West Australian General Practice Education and Training, RACGP, that's the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, ACRIM, the Australian College of Rural and Remote Medicine, the WA Country Health Service, Rural Generalist Pathway WA, and Rural Health West. I would also like to thank our sponsor, MDA National, who helped to make the events like this possible tonight. Britt.
Hi, everyone. At the end of the presentations, we will invite all panellists back to answer questions, but please feel free to post any questions you have during the presentation via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This webinar will also be recorded. Well, tonight we'll be discussing what's it really like to be a GP. And we have a great lineup of experienced practitioners based both metro and regional, ready to give you some good insights.
The presentations will start with information on becoming a GP, including college applications, what needs to be done and application close dates. We will hear from Dr. Karen Jodlowski-Tan, National Clinical Lead at the RACGP, June Folds, Training Network Coordinator for WA from ACRIM. But first, I would like to welcome Isabel Broderick, Rural Manager at WAGPET. Isabel, welcome.
Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Isabel Broderick. As mentioned earlier, I am the Rural Program Manager at WAGPET. WAGPET is one of 9 RTOs delivering the AGPT in Australia. The AGPT program is 3 to 4 years, depending on your chosen college and training pathway. Part-time training and leave is available. You can apply as early as your intern year. GP registrars train in accredited GP training practices whilst working towards their fellowship. Registrars will receive dedicated teaching time from experienced GP supervisors. There are 2 pathways in which you can choose from. With the RACGP, there's general and rural. To train in a metro setting, registrars are required to train in either outer metro, urban and also rural locations. At least 12 months is to be spent in an outer metro or rural setting, a combination which can be done either rural and in an AMS. Rural pathway is with ACRIM and RACGP. Your training is undertaken in mostly rural locations, MMM 2 to 7. Our rural practices provide many opportunities for procedural medicine. Training in WA. So there are currently 298 accredited training facilities, more than 600 accredited supervisors across WA. There's a diverse range of training locations from Kununurra all the way down to Esperance and everything in between. There's also a variety of advanced additional skills opportunities in rural and metro settings. Now, eligibility. Before applying to either college, you must first ensure that you are eligible to undertake GP training. Please check the eligibility criteria for the college in which you are applying for. Some of the criteria includes being an Australian or New Zealand permanent resident, have a recognised medical qualification, hold or expect to hold general medical registration prior to the commencement of training. Applications for the 2023 intake are open now and are due to close on the 19th of April. You should apply directly to the college you're interested in, provide all supporting documentation that is true, correct and complete, ensure all documents are scanned properly and in colour. At times, your application may need more information. Please check regularly your emails and provide any further documentation that is requested. You need to ensure that your references are aware and available to support your application, and be sure to contact your preferred GP college should you require any further information on the application or eligibility process. Now, that's eligibility. We then go on to selections. The colleges will contact you regarding further assessment. Suitability assessments are for ACRRM and the CAT for RACGP. After successful completion of your college assessment, you'll be contacted for an interview. Interviews are conducted by accredited interviewers within your preferred region. Suitable applicants are offered training positions and will be required to accept within a specific time frame. So in summary, check if you meet the eligibility criteria, include all of your required documentation, be clear where you want to train for 2023 and on what pathway. Check the WAGPET website for the available training locations. You can also see where there are advanced rural skills or advanced skills training opportunities. Apply online for the AGPT program through either college website. Select your training region, pay the relevant college fees, and if successful, after your assessment, complete your interview. I'll hand over now to June Folds, the Training Network Coordinator for ACRRM.
Thanks, Isabel. So Isabel dealt with AGPT. What I'd like to talk about are the other three pathways which ACRRM offer to fellowship. The first one is Independent Pathway. By virtue of that name, it's a very flexible, self-directed learning for doctors who prefer not to be involved in a structured program. So this is a program where doctors are very flexible. They can find their own practice, they can find their own supervisor, and they tend to move around a bit. So this program, Independent Pathway, allows a few more years to complete the fellowship. That can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. So if sometimes, as we know, if we have too much time to do something, we can procrastinate. And by the time we get around to thinking about our assessments, etc., we're running out of time. So it's a very self-directed doctor who engages in Independent Pathway. So this is a self-funded program. At this time and until the end of the year, the government will give you a rebate for $15,000 to offset the cost of your training. Independent Pathway tends to be rolling applications. For this year and next year, there is an intake in May for July 2022, and for 2023, there's an intake in August. So for those wanting to enroll this year, you have to enroll by May, for next year by August. Second scheme is the Remote Vocational Training Scheme, and this is mainly for doctors wanting to practice in remote areas and Aboriginal medical services. So when a doctor enrolls in RVTS, they can enroll in either one of the colleges, ACRRM or RACGP, or indeed some doctors choose to do a dual fellowship of both ACRRM and RACGP. The majority of the education and supervision is delivered remotely by RVTS with a team of medical educators through the country. So in this scheme, you can actually stay in your own practice for the duration of your training. And one would hope by after 4 years, you decide to opt to stay in that practice. This program is government funded, and there's 2 application rounds per year. Check on the website for the actual dates. The latest ACRRM pathway is Rural Generalist Training Scheme. The first cohort started in October last year, and at the moment I have about 7 or 8 RGTAs registrars who are in the northwest around Broome and Kununurra. And they're working across a range of disciplines, some of them in general practice, some of them in composite post, general practice and specialist or ED. Same curriculum, same time frame, same access to RPL as AGPT. For the RGTS program, there is funding available for not only registrars, but for practices and for supervisors. I think as the program evolves, there's going to be a lot more emphasis on matching registrars with practices and vice versa, because we do know that if a registrar has not the best experience in a training practice, particularly towards the end of their training, that can leave a very bad taste, and it could be the difference of a registrar deciding to stay or not to stay. So there's going to be emphasis on that matching. I think down the track also, there's going to be emphasis on what I'm calling the non-procedural skills: communication, leadership, community advocacy, working in teams. This program is flexible to meet the needs of the registrar, and probably after about the first 12 months, a registrar could opt to start moving around to different practices and gaining different experiences. Government funded as is AGPT. For 2022, there is an intake on the 19th of April. For 2023, an intake on the 23rd of May. Thanks for that, and I'll hand you over to Karen.
Thank you, June and Isabel, for the background information. I'm not going to go over the same things that's already been said. I'm a rural GP and a medical educator, but I'm actually going to try and explain to you this very confusing pathways to becoming a GP and a rural GP. So you've heard about the different programs. There's the Australian General Practice Training Program, which Isabel and June both talked about. There's the Remote Vocational Training Scheme, which is RVTS, that's a workforce program. And then there are some self-funded programs, such as what we call the PEP, the Practice Experience Pathway. And there's some changes in the PEP. So for RACGP training, you've got these three programs: the AGPT, the RVTS, and the PEP, where you can undertake RACGP training. Now, within the RACGP training, there are several pathways, and we have actually the greatest number of options for people wanting to do general practice, because we have the general pathway, the rural pathway, and the rural generalist pathway. Now, you've probably heard a lot about rural generalism, and there may be some confusion, but everyone across the general, the rural, or the rural generalist pathway can actually choose to work in rural locations. They can all choose to become a rural generalist across any of our training pathways. It's only limited whether you can join the general pathway depending on whether you have restrictions under the Health Insurance Commission Section 19AB. So that's the only difference. So anyone who's interested in working rural can go through any of our pathways to work rural and become a rural generalist. Our program also offers a lot of flexibility because of the different pathways that allow you to work rural as well. There is, throughout our program, the intention to allow people to gain as diverse experience as possible through different practices. But if someone wants to work rural and train rurally, we would support them to stay in that location and support the community out there. So schemes such as the RVTS already works like that. And I believe that all the rural generalist training programs would support that if you want to work in a certain community. So with our rural generalist training, there is, according to the Collinggrove definition, they need to be someone who's a rural GP, but also have additional skills in some non-general practice specialist area of practice, and also to have enough skills to cover emergency in a place where you might be working by yourself. So our program enable people to gain those skills and the confidence to work in a rural location and practice in expanded scope in the area of interest to you. The RACGP has over 40,000 members and over 20,000 rural members, and with about half of those in active rural general practice. There's a lot of support for anyone who chooses to train with RACGP. And on that note, I'm going to hand back over to Danushka.
Thank you very much for your presentations, everyone. We would now like to invite up GP and Medical Director, Dr. Krista Balsami, and GP Health Coach and Educator, Dr. Ricky Priest, to speak about their personal journeys as Metro-based doctors. Dr. Sami, if you could start us off, please.
Hi, everyone. So as Danushka said, I'm a GP locally in Perth, and I run 2 practices and have expanded recently to do some stuff with skin, like a cosmetic surgery, and also a mental health centre. And I remember being kind of like a lot of you as a med student, and GP was so not on my radar. I wanted to do really exciting medicine, I thought GP is clearly not that. And I actually always said to everyone, I want to be a pediatrician. And it was, well, my mum, who's a very, obviously a very culturally Indian woman, was like, no, you can't do GP, can't do pediatrician because you'll be working really long hours and it's not, suitable for an Indian lady who wants to have babies. It's classic Indian mum there. So I started to look at GP only because of the Indian mum. And now sort of 12 years later, I really am not looking back at all. I absolutely love GP, and hopefully some of my experiences of why I really enjoy GP might help inspire some of you guys, especially if you're sat there thinking, I want something a little bit more exciting, and I want something that I can be more creative and do more procedures. The thing I probably love most about being a GP is the autonomy that you get. And honestly, having seen lots of my friends do some hospital-based jobs, I definitely feel that GP gives you the best of all the worlds. You can really think outside of the box and do what you want to do and carve out your niche. And I am my day job, do a lot of GP medicine. But then a couple of days a week, I've started doing some skin stuff and cosmetic stuff, which has been really exciting. And I think it's a really great opportunity to be flexible and think about how you want to practice things. And if you want some of the more exciting procedures and things like that, there's no reason why you can't integrate that into your job and make you an even better, more well-rounded GP. It's also been a little bit of an opportunity because I've really enjoyed being involved in owning my own business. And I think I've always been intrigued by business as well. And opening my own GP surgery has meant that I've really had to think about and learn so many things around business, especially sort of just accounting, business concepts, unique selling points, and tax returns, and all these things that I never really thought I would be doing as a GP. But it's been a really neat way for me to marry business skills with the career and with being a GP. So I definitely think that it's a really great opportunity for people, because I think everyone thinks about GP as, oh, you're just going to be standard seeing coughs and colds and pill checks, and it's going to be really boring. And there are some days where I see lots of coughs and colds and lots of query COVID. However, there are so many days where, you get weird and wonderful things coming through the door, people in very different situations, and depending on what sort of GP you decide you want to do, and because it's very flat, you can really carve that out. You're a bit of ENT, a little bit of women's health, a little bit of cosmetics. You can still hear me. My internet connection, it says, is unstable, so hopefully you can all hear me. So yeah, it's definitely very flexible, and I still haven't got a kid. Unfortunately, my Indian mum is still disappointed about that. Got to meet the right fella first, but I definitely now, if I had a kid, wouldn't be working all those sort of hospital hours and not getting very much choice about that. So maybe mama was right in the end. So that's it from me, and I think I'll pass on to Dr. Ricky Priest.
Thank you. I really enjoyed hearing about your background in so many different things that you've done, especially business. I don't think we hear about that very much at all in medical school. I'm going to talk, so the topic for tonight is what's it really like to be a GP, but I'm going to tell you what it's like to be a GP in training, because I'm a GP registrar and I've only been working as a GP for 10 months. So this is all a bit fresh to me. And tonight I'm going to tell you about how being a GP is like strawberry picking. So just trust me, stay with me on this, and with some luck, it'll make sense. In 2018, I was taking maternity leave away from my work as an obs and gynae service registrar after the birth of our second baby. And it was around the time where there was that idiot that had been putting needles into strawberries in supermarkets. So every parent, child, dog and mothers group in the whole of Perth was out strawberry picking to show support for the industry and for the local growers. And we made the regrettable decision to take our 2-week-old baby and not quite yet 2-year-old daughter with us strawberry picking, and it was chaos. And at one point I sat down on a little mound in amongst the fields and fed my baby while doing a bit of people watching, and it was so fascinating. The parents were so stressed trying to control their toddlers while getting as many strawberries as they could. And I noticed a few things going on that had some similarities to lessons to do with a career in medicine. So behold. The first one is to run your own race. So don't rush around like a madman trying to get out to the front of the line as quick as you can. It's okay to take some scenic detours or completely change tracks, like in my case. Since early high school, I thought I knew that I wanted to be involved in pregnancy care as a midwife or obstetrician. But being a specialist obstetrician seemed like my dream career, and everything I did was geared towards that. I worked for 6 years in tertiary obs and gynae. I had my own 2 kids in that time, and I realised that becoming a mother had really changed me, and that the things that I valued had changed. And I fell out of love with gynecology surgery, spending hours and hours in theatre, lost its shine. And I realised that things like holidays, my own family, long-term relationships with patients, medical student education and preventive care, they were the things that I really valued the most. And so GP training became the clear choice for me, and the rest was all letting go of this internalized ego that can be so ingrained when it comes to surgical careers. So don't be sucked into the rat race. Stop comparing yourself to others. A career in medicine is a marathon, and I'm glad that I did what was aligned with my own values and not what I'd internalized as what I should do because of the culture of medicine and because of my own ego. The second lesson I had from picking strawberries was to allow yourself to be distracted by the things that spark your interest or bring you joy. When we were strawberry picking, there were little puddles of fresh water on these big sheets of plastic which were above the strawberries and propped up. And every toddler wanted to play with these little puddles of water. And we watched the parents dragging disappointed toddlers away from the water and telling them to focus on filling up their baskets with strawberries. So that was the task at hand. And bear with me, one of the things that I love about GP is that you get to play in so many puddles, as we've already heard. And I think with all of the rural generalists coming up, we're going to hear about some more puddles that they play in. I was terrified about the breadth of knowledge required in GP, but ultimately we're specialists in relationships, and we know where and who to go to if we're unsure about things. And especially in urban GP, there's rarely things that are so urgent that we can't organise a follow-up after starting initial treatments or a bit of investigation, and then bring them back after reading up about things or speaking to someone else. And I love to learn. And I learn so much every single day as a GP registrar. It's just endless. And specialists spend their careers for the most part doing slightly different versions of the same thing day in, day out. And that is definitely not my job description at the moment. So in GP, anything that sparks your curiosity can be an area of interest. In the hospital, I had very little control over my own time, what I did, where I worked, who I worked with, how long I could spend with the patient. I loved working in the hospital, but there was not a lot of autonomy, like Christabel's already mentioned. Whereas now, if I want to spend a bit longer with the patient, I just book in a bit of extra time. I have a lot of control over my leave and my weekly schedule, and that sense of autonomy with making clinical decisions with the support of a supervisor. It's a good feeling. At the moment, I'm doing an academic post. So I'm at the University of Notre Dame doing research and teaching and clinical work all within the spread of a week as part of my GP training and doing a GP training term doing that. I've done some certification to be a health and wellness coach, and I love integrating that into general practice, and behaviour change is something that's a very enjoyable part of GP, and still getting to do a bit of deliveries and obstetrics on the side. We all have to make some personal sacrifices for medicine, but allow yourself to have some puddles outside of work. I don't have many side interests. I'm just a bit of a nerd who likes to learn and do extra courses in my spare time. I'm not a marathon runner, a dancer, a singer, or the 101 other things that doctors can be outside of work time. For me, being outside of work is all about friends and family. And I put off applying for training for many years. I was PGY 8 before I applied for a training program, so GP training, so that I could spend that time with the kids when they were little, and I don't regret it for a minute. I was behind my peers as far as them finishing their training, but I got to go to Adventure World on Mondays, we got to go to Zoo School on Tuesdays, and work part-time for that season. And so looking back on that, I think I would have really regretted that if I had done it differently. So number 3, it's about quality, not quantity. This is the last one. Back to the strawberry fields. The overtired kids were dragged around screaming while their parents raced to fill up their basket to the brim, and it was all about how many strawberries you could get. So slow down when you can to make time to enjoy the little things, the joyful things in medicine. We have front row seats to people's lives in GP, and it's such a privilege. In one day, I can go from doing a cesarean and seeing the faces of new parents as we hold up their baby, to then holding a sobbing parent as we break the news that their ultrasound showed that they had a miscarriage, to then supporting women out of a domestic violence relationship, to super cute 6-week baby checks and blowing bubbles for kids while they're getting vaccinations. It's just such a huge variety. And it's incredible to think that people trust me, trust us with their health, to journey alongside them through the best days and the worst. We laugh, we cry with them. And I've recently learned we can also choose in general practice to not see patients when there isn't a therapeutic relationship that's grounded in mutual trust and understanding. And I'm learning as a GP reg how to think like a generalist, to be really pragmatic and work out what's really important to this patient in front of me in a way that's different to the hospital, and that mystery of trying to figure things out and diagnose the rare things, and trying to figure out how to use coaching skills to facilitate behaviour change. People often ask me about money, so I'm going to touch on that subject from a GP registrar perspective. I hope that's okay. So in my first training term as a GP, I was on the equivalent of my part-time hospital level 3 registrar, so a little bit higher than a resident and junior doctor rate. But after GPT 1, I've invested time into learning how to bill correctly, and I'm at a private clinic where I can choose to bulk bill if I want, for those who do need it, but I'm the sole income earner. I've got a full-time stay-at-home dad, hubby at home, and we're managing to get by with a few local holidays. And if you need it, there's always so much high-paying locum work around, from $1,500 to $2,500 a day, potentially for some hospital work if it's really needed. And there's always work available. So some of my friends in ONG didn't get offered positions in the hospital last year, but there will always be jobs available for GPs, or certainly that seems to be the way at the moment. And I just don't buy the blanket rule that GPs are not as well remunerated. It's not necessarily true. But I also think that my personal ethos is it's about the quality of those strawberries and the quality of relationships, not just about the quantity of what we get paid at the end of the day. And a special thanks to GPDU members for some of the inspiration for this talk. And that's a small snapshot of some of my reflections on strawberries, puddles, and this hopscotch career into general practice. So run your own race, allow yourself to be distracted by the things that spark your interest or bring you joy. And it's not about quality or quantity. What's the point of having a big basket of strawberries if you went through hell to get there? So slow down, enjoy the journey, and remember to eat some of the strawberries along the way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. I've never heard of the strawberry picking analogy, but I really enjoyed that. In a similar vein, now we're going to hear from some other doctors about their experiences out in the country. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Laura Butters, a GP based out of Albany with a passion for palliative care. Dr. Nathan Combs, whose focus on obstetrics has taken him from Broome and now to Kununurra. and Dr. Peter Maguire, the Rural Clinical School of WA's Medical Coordinator based on Narrogin. And don't forget, if anybody has any questions, please do send them in via the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen there. And now I'll hand over to Dr. Peters. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name's Laura. I have a very short PowerPoint, I promise, to share with you. So I'm in between Christabel and Ricky in that I'm a new fellow. I finished my general practice training last year. I'm not going to go through sort of the pathway of the training program because that's already been really well covered by the different training organisations. But I was a general pathway AGTP RACGP trainee, and though I was a general pathway, I chose to do all of my training rural. So I did all of my general practice training rurally, and that was all done in Broome in a mix of private practice and in Aboriginal medical services, with my extended skills being in Aboriginal health. Managed to get through all the exams, and I'm now doing a FAR GP, which will be replaced by the Rural Generalist qualification from the second half of this year in palliative care in Albany. And I'm also doing a clinical diploma in palliative medicine. So my days at the moment are very varied. I see hospital inpatients, I see patients in our hospice unit, and I also do home visits and do community palliative care medicine for the entire Great Southern region. So that last week I was out doing clinics in Jerramungup and Bremer Bay. So certainly a lot of scope to do things in general practice. I was asked to present on some of the good and the not so good things about general practice, and certainly I think what you've heard from the other GPs here tonight, that general practice is really flexible. I really enjoyed it. I was a late entrant to training as well, and there was so much more that was under my control than in hospital medicine in terms of my hours and where I worked and how I worked. I was able to drop down. I did a term of general practice part-time when I was preparing for my exams, and I was able to take leave from the program last year very easily and have 3 months to spend with family. It's a really broad scope of practice, particularly when you work rurally and have limited specialist resources. And so the vast majority of my rural colleagues certainly feel that they see a huge breadth of medicine, and there are opportunities to do sort of more acute medicine as well as sort of chronic medicine, chronic care, geriatrics, and home care. The thing I really love about general practice is it let me pursue both of my core interests in medicine, which is palliative care and Aboriginal health, whereas a lot of other training pathways that I was going to be restricted and I would have to pick one and stick with that particular interest. And it's led me all the way now to full-time work in palliative care, and I hope to continue some palliative care dedicated work in the future, particularly in culturally appropriate palliative care for Aboriginal people. It's really well supported as a training program, and I think a lot of people think of general practitioners sort of working independently and in isolation. There certainly is that autonomy and that ability to make your own decisions and choose your own path. But my experience has really been that general practice is very collegiate, and all of the general practitioners that I've worked with have been incredibly supportive, particularly for those really tricky cases where you're not quite sure what you're managing and who the best person might be to get support. And then the best thing in my experience has been the opportunity for rural placements and to do travel around that. So these are all photos that I've taken over the last 3 years. None of them are edited because I don't know how to do that. This is out in Warman, Turkey Creek, out near Kununurra, one of the remote clinics that we did regularly up there from Kununurra Hospital. This is the Ord River and the Ord Valley at sunrise from the top of Elephant Rock, and that's pretty close to the middle of town. So you can definitely do a walk up and down and be at work in time for an 8 o'clock start. This is El Questro Gorge, and this was a particularly long hike that I did one day when my sister came to visit. The Bungle Bungles, which I visited a couple of times while I was based in Kununurra. This is Sunrise at Cable Beach. This makes it seem like I'm up for sunrise a lot, but actually it's a rare occurrence. Gibb River Road, which we did a trip for last year. And then this is from where I'm based now. So this is the Treetop Walk in Walpole with very typical Great Southern weather in the background. A bit of sunshine from the Parongarups. And this is where I was less than a week ago out in Bremer Bay, going for a morning walk with my boss before we did our outreach clinic and went and saw a bunch of patients at home. So there's really amazing opportunities to work in incredible places, to combine it with travel and do some really interesting medicine. In terms of the not so good, it's a really broad scope of practice. I think general practice, sometimes there's this perception that it's an easy specialty, and it's really not. Like Ricky said, there's a lot of learning. You do have to work hard to make sure that you are able to assess the patient in front of you and safely manage them when you might not have all of the information to fill in all the pieces. And sometimes in private practice, you're doing that in a 10 or a 15-minute consult. So you really, you do need to be able to get your head around that real scope of generalist practice. It is sometimes, there's a number of training pathways. I think particularly for me, being a relatively senior doctor coming in, it did sometimes feel a little bit prescriptive, but there certainly are exemptions, and it's definitely worth speaking with your program, and particularly through WAGPET, you'll have medical educators and education officers to find out what might be possible for you. I was able to get some recognition of prior learning and get some various exemptions for qualifications that I'd already completed. I think your training experience can be quite different depending on the practice and the supervisor. And so I think if you are considering general practice, it is worth thinking about where you want to be and what your interests are, whether a small practice might be a better fit for you, whether a big practice might be a better fit for you, whether there's a particular interest that you have, and then trying to choose a supervisor who fits with that. So if you're really interested in skin cancer medicine, finding a practice that does a lot of that work so that you can get that exposure and that skill that you want to develop. Christabel touched a bit on it, but sort of the financial side and understanding your contracts, I think can be quite challenging, especially coming from hospital medicine where they're often quite straightforward. And that's something it's worth getting a bit of extra support and potentially professional advice about. My experience has been, as Ricky said, sort of that general practice, you actually do have quite good earning potential, particularly working rurally where there are quite a lot of incentives. And so certainly if you do bill in the way that you should, that can all lead to a very comfortable income. And exams are always the not so good bit, but they're the hurdle that you need to get through in terms of specialist training. I think I might skip over some of this in the interest of time, but certainly there's lots of information available through the colleges in terms of selection to the program. And a lot of what I wish I'd known was sort of more around those placements and about marrying up placements with extended skills. And that's certainly something to discuss with your supervisors and discuss with the college if you are interested in rural general practice. And that's it from me. I'll pass it over to Nathan.
How you going? You also lived in Cunnamulla, or I feel like you've stolen half my photos now. I'll just get my presentation up 1 second. Okay, well, I'm going to talk about rural generalism. I think that Laura's done a bit of this anyway, so as well. This is Warman, Turkey Creek, where Laura had a picture of the troopy on the airstrip. Here is a plane and MDT where we ran a big clinic with physicians and allied health as well. and we all crowded aboard the caravan. It took much longer to take off than normal with the bigger load. So I was firstly going to talk about why did I train in GP? For me, GP was a practical decision. So I thought I would like to do some work in Africa, and I wanted to be the most useful doctor working in a remote African setting. And research suggests that GPs are the most useful doctors to the health system. And that would be the same in working in Africa as it is in Australia. And also, again, working in a rural and remote setting, GPs are the doctors who really make the most difference. Cardiothoracic surgeons in Kununurra don't make that much difference. And I was also interested in having general surgical skills, not doing general surgery because that's no longer that general, but having some general surgical skills. So at the moment, I'm here in Kununurra. I'm married with 3 kids. I fellowed last year in January. I did my training in Perth and Geraldton. So once I decided my practicalities of becoming a GP, I decided to do obstetrics to get some surgical skills for cesarean section. And I did that at King Edward, seconded to Joondalup and Osborne Park. And then I went up to Geraldton to complete my GP training. So I did my AST, my specialty part of my training first. Went and finished my training in Geraldton, working as a GP in private practice and as a visiting medical officer at the hospital delivering babies. Now I've moved up to Kununurra and I work at the hospital for the hospital. I do babies, I do ED, I do ward, and I do clinics, remote clinics out in different Aboriginal communities, antenatal clinics and skin clinics. Why should you become a rural GP, a rural generalist? I feel like I'm a bit like a used car salesman now. Laura's talked about bad things. I've only got good things on my sides. I think it would be boring if I was a big toe specialist in the city. So you get that exposure to more general things. You never know what's going to come in your GP practice. You never know what's going to come in the ED door. And why would I go to the bush? Because you're more likely to get that thing through the ED door than you are through the private GP clinic. I get way more STEMIs through the ED door than you would in a city clinic. Not saying that you wouldn't ever get a STEMI come through your door there. If you like variety, so the opposite of that. You like procedural work, so if you're interested in anaesthetics, obstetrics and minor surgery. You want to work in an area where you're needed the most and you'll have the most impact on the healthcare system of Australia. You like flying around in small aircraft for free. You want a place to live where it takes 2 minutes to walk to work or 30 seconds to drive. You like the outdoor life. And actually, like the others, I would actually say that it pays pretty well. Private clinics is a bit harder. The hospital, working for the government in the hospital definitely pays well. You can earn a lot of private clinics too with private billing, but it's a bit more difficult than Medicare. This is the Ord River and the dam across Kununurra, which provides irrigation to all our crops. And here's some of my outcomes that I've had while working in Geraldton. Fun stuff. So delivering babies, getting stuff out of eyes, managing fractures, suturing things up. There's no plastic surgeon here and people don't really want to fly 3,500 k's to Perth to get it done. So you get to do the lipoplastic surgeon stuff too. Lateral canthotomy is something that I've done to release orbital compartment syndrome. Pericardiocentesis, my colleague did the other day. Chest drains happen and lumbar punctures too. As you can see, some lateral canthotomy up on the left and pericardiocentesis on the right. The foreign body in the middle, gassing people in a chest drain. All things that you can do as a rural generalist. Other stuff that maybe not so fun, but very satisfying, looking after inpatients, working them up, getting that physician line working, having a problem list and getting it all done and packing them off back home, going out to remote clinics, managing chronic diseases, saving people's lives for real. Antenatal care, just the privilege of being able to talk to people about smoking and protect their unborn child. Walking with your patient through a story when they're addicted to drugs and then walking along with them through years as they finally come off drugs is a real privilege. And working with your close-knit team when it's working in the hospital and obstetrics with the midwives or with the other hospital doctors or when you're in a private clinic can be very satisfying. How do you become a rural generalist? Well, you can be acclimatised as GP. Majority of people at my hospital are ACRIL trainees. Some are dual pathway. Why ACRM? I did ACRM because I thought it was designed for rural and not patched like the RACGP program. It's got higher member satisfaction when I talk to the people, and that's probably because there's smaller numbers and you feel more listened to. There's a majority of pathways, as we talked about before, so you can always go onto the ACRM website and have a look. Good things about the training, I think it spits you out as a well-rounded doctor. You have to do some anaesthetics, some ED, some ward kind of work, some obstetrics if it's not your subspecialty. You have to do a bit of everything, so you come out quite well-rounded. And you've got a qualification, internationally respected, and it gives you those skills and the confidence that you need, not just giving you the qualification. Some bad things, it takes a bit longer. 4 years, I would say not everyone does 4 years. It often ends up a touch longer than that. But that's including the prior learning you've had. They're quite hard exams and quite difficult study. At one stage when I was doing it, they had quite a high failure rate, higher than RACGP, but I think it changes year to year, so it might be back to normal again. They're quite expensive. All GP exams are expensive, but it's actually less expensive than my colleagues spent on their RACGP exams. I didn't enjoy my AGPT experience as well. I found it quite restrictive and prescriptive, but it may have changed in that time since then. Training's 4 years. You've got to do the basic training, which takes 3 years, and then 1 year of specialist training, which you can do back to front if you would like I did. You can do many ASTs, so there's a list of the many you could choose from. I put the more common ones up the top. But there's literally many options to choose. Other stuff you have to do to finish, some exams, some courses, and a logbook. And that's the end of my talk. If you have any questions, you can ask at the end, and I'll hand over to Peter.
Oops. Here we go. Where's my picture? Yeah. Right. I'm having hello everyone. Hope you can see I'm up in the right corner of mine, so I thought I wasn't on. But yeah, my name is Peter Maguire. I guess I'm approaching this from the other end of the career journey, being, as you can see, quite a bit older than everybody else here. Which, yeah, so that's a bit of a different perspective. I'm listed to talk about rural general practice, but interestingly, I've spent probably the majority of my career in metro general practice, moved to the country at a ripe old age. So I'm a UWA graduate, and I became a fellow of the RACGP in 1984. There was only one college in those days for general practice. And I had a fairly varied career. I have worked in Byford, which was where I started, which in those days, actually, even though it's technically metropolitan, was a small rural town. And I both did emergency at Armidale-Kelmscott Hospital and obstetrics, which you could do in those days. Armidale-Kelmscott was a GP-run hospital in the 80s. Can't recognise it these days. After Byford, I've worked in Gooseberry Hill, Bayswater, Claremont for about 15 years until we decided to go to Narrogin, partly to take up a position with the Royal Clinical School. So as you can imagine, that was quite a big change of focus from Claremont to Narrogin, and it was quite a steep learning curve, but I actually managed to negotiate that successfully, I think. So without, yeah, I think it's important not to downplay metropolitan general practice, even though I'm here to promote rural, and certainly I've enjoyed my rural career hugely. And it is different to metro, but I still would not count metro as boring necessarily. I enjoyed my time at Claremont in particular. Very varied patient groups there, from the trotting people in Byford through to a completely different demographic in Bayswater, and then the lawyers and accountants in Claremont. So, and that's probably as challenging as any of them. So one of the tasks I was given for tonight was to talk about my GP training experience, and that won't take very long because there really wasn't any. The GP training program was in its infancy in those days and was very much optional and had very little structure. And it really, the supervision was pretty loose, I have to say, and we had a supervisor who took an interest but wasn't looking over your shoulder. Why did I go on to general practice? I think a big influence was a stint in Albany, interestingly, where Laura Butters is now. I spent a GP term at Southern Regional Medical Group in PGY2, which was a very steep learning curve indeed. And that was followed by 3 months at Port Hedland Hospital as a DMO in PGY2. So both of those were amazing experiences. And I think had I not left RPH, maybe I still would be there now. But I had a lot, there were major experiences. Thinking about general practice in general, both metro and rural, I certainly echo Ricky's thoughts about some of the positives. The people that you meet, I guess there's no other branch of medicine probably which offers such complex relationships with patients and families over a long period of time. The GP is there for the patient like few other doctors. And over a 40-year career, I can still remember lots of patients from even 40 years ago who made a big impression on me. I was thinking of who I really remember. There was a lovely Italian family, a husband and wife who were very Italian, hardly spoke English, lived out in Mundijong. And they came to see me every few weeks. She used to tell her husband off all the time for not putting the creams on his legs. Came along with a dozen eggs every time and some very dodgy looking Italian red wine. Other positives, we've already mentioned the endless variety of work that we see. I think an important thing is that ability to develop special interests. After about 10 years of full-time general practice, I got interested in medical education, which led me to take a position with the GP training program with the RACGP as it was then. And I spent initially full-time and then went half-time because I missed clinical practice. And stayed there for quite a few years before joining the Royal Clinical School and getting involved in student teaching. And there were lots of other special interest areas that as many of our participants have demonstrated, between skin clinics and palliative care and alcohol, drugs. There's lots and lots of things that GPs can do to break it up a bit, and so you don't spend the whole week consulting, which can be pretty punishing in terms of tiredness and fatigue. Thinking about rural practice in particular, which is what I was told to do, I guess, I think you've already seen the positives in the wider scope of practice. With all due respect to Nathan, all those wonderful things he does, I would like to perhaps dispel the myth that sometimes is broadcast around the place that all rural GPs have to be as heroic as Nathan and do all those fancy things. That used to be most rural GPs. When I was a student, the image of the rural GP was someone who was always male in those days. Wandered around in boots and moleskins and a Kuba, who delivered the babies, gave the anaesthetics, did all the surgery, multi-trauma, was on call 24/7. And by this stage, he was probably on his third marriage and his kids didn't know him. So that was what it was like 50 or 60 years ago. And even for the rural generalists, that's not true anymore. But in many rural towns in WA, a significant proportion of rural GPs never cross the hospital door. And there's plenty of room for those of you who perhaps don't aspire to those heroic acts, but really want to be a GP, but want a rural career. And even, office-based general practice in rural areas can be extremely rewarding. You don't have to necessarily be a hospitalist. My rural practice, however, was quite rural generalist. In those first years in Narrogin, I was in a private practice and I had hospital admitting rights, looked after the inpatients and did emergency shifts as well as looking after Royal Clinical School, which was pretty full week. And we had left Narrogin and I'd gone back to the city for a while. And I was approached to take over. They changed the model of care at the hospital, and now the medical ward is looked after by a salaried SMO. And they were looking for someone, and I said, "Oh, I'll give it a go for 6 months." That was 4 years ago. So I now work as a hospitalist, I suppose. I'm full-time ward-based doctor, pretending to be a physician, I suppose, somewhat unsuccessfully at times, but it's been an incredibly good job. Very interesting. I see a lot of my old GP patients now who come into the hospital and say, I thought you'd retire, Dr. Maguire. So it's been great. It's been a really good job. And for those of you who don't like the thought of bulk billing and having to charge fees, as Nathan said, there's certainly some advantages of working as a salary doctor for WA Health. It takes some of those worries about practice management and having to deal with accountants and payroll tax and God knows what. I certainly haven't missed that, even though for some of us it's a bit of an interesting sideline to become a business manager. So downsides, I suppose it's only fair to talk about those. We've already spoken about the knowledge, the huge breadth of knowledge that's required for general practice, both city and rural. It is much easier than it was in the 80s, I have to say. I remember the days when I had a filing cabinet full of things cut out of journals, and when the patient came in, I could never find what I was looking for. But nowadays, that's a lot easier. For GPs, living with uncertainty is, I think, something that challenges some of us. And I have met some of my ex-trainees who now do other disciplines who said that it got too hard. The ability to manage patients safely without being entirely sure what the matter is probably a key skill in general practice. Someone mentioned the time pressures, the 15-minute blocks. I must admit I don't miss that in hospital, having gone back to hospital work. Finances, yeah, sure, you're unlikely to make the rich list from general practice, but equally, you're not going to starve, they'll always be work. And the money, in private practice, if you take it seriously and look at how to do it, in terms of the billing, you can make quite a decent income, as we've said. Let's see anything else I needed. Other downsides in rural practice. Why do people not go? I mean, I think these are pretty well known, really. The separation from family, from friends, the family difficulties sometimes in terms of part-time employment, worrying about kids, education, those sort of things, are challenges you've got to think about, I think. And the choice of your location is important in terms of solving those problems. But the positives in the rural lifestyle, as also has been said, are very significant. And but you can have a really good life out here in the bush. Advice, I think someone else mentioned, get a breadth of skills. You try to build as much skill base as possible. There is a big demand for competent rural GPs with a broad skill set. And certainly having additional skills in metropolitan Perth is also a real bonus and helps you get the jobs you want. If you're in private practice, pay attention to the business side of it. Get good advice. I'd certainly be richer if I had got better advice in my early days, I think. And if you're thinking rural, think about those family things. Most GPs love their work wherever it is in WA, but some towns are really hard on the family. That's a big problem with no easy solution. You've only got to look at the distribution of doctors across WA, that the vast majority of GPs are within 50 k's of the coast, and it gets pretty thin inland. Kalgoorlie is desperately short of GPs. So choose your location carefully. And I think that'll do for now. I'll pass it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Peter. There's a little side note here for those on the call. Peter was one of my medical educators when I went through my GP training, and he's also the current chair of the AMA WA Rural Practice Group, advocating for from better workforce to paying conditions. So on behalf of everyone here, Peter, thank you for your long-standing commitment to general practice and rural practice, and your commitment to the whole profession. So thank you. For everyone who haven't noticed, there is a Q&A button at the top of the bar where it is about time for you to throw in a question. Otherwise, we're going to do a bit of our own Q&A, which we can do, but it'll be better if you actually pop something in. So at the top of the bar, Q&A, start popping those things in. We're now going to hear from Dr. Abby Harwood. In fact, just to close the whole loop, I actually got to know Abby from my GP training days as well. So Abby is now the Director of Clinical Training from the Rural Generalist Pathway WA Coordination Unit. And then after Abby, we've got Ms. Sonia Barkovic, who's the Future Workforce Project Officer from Rural Health West. But first of all, let me welcome Abby.
Thanks, Benny. And funnily enough, Peter Maguire was my training advisor when I did the old RACGP rural training scheme. So the one thing about working rural is that it is a very small and quite close-knit community, and everyone knows everyone. I'm just going to share my screen and we'll go through a couple of slides. To give you my background, I am a rural generalist, and I most recently was working in emergency medicine at Yarrabah, which is a remote community in Queensland, prior to getting this job and relocating back to WA, which was where I was born, bred and trained. And my current advanced skills are emergency medicine, paediatrics and Indigenous health. Initially, I had an advanced skill as a GP obstetrician and practiced in Karratha and Derby, but as I got into smaller and smaller communities, didn't have the opportunity to maintain that skill. As Betty said, I'm the Director of Clinical Training for the Rural Generalist Pathway WA Coordination Unit. What that means, we are the local implementation body for WA for the National Rural Generalist Task Force, which is run by the Rural Health Commissioner. This is the actual definition of a rural generalist from the original Palmgrove Agreement, which arose out of the Wonka Rural meeting in Cairns in 2017, when we came up with this, this definition of what a rural generalist is. So at the core, we're all GPs, and we provide comprehensive general practice and emergency care, but we also have training in additional skills to meet the current and future specific healthcare needs of our communities. So our unit is made up of the central team, which we sit within the WACS building at Bennett Street here in East Perth. There's myself, there's Erin Furness, the Senior Project Officer, Maddie, our Medical Education Registrar, Priya, who's starting as our Medical Education Officer in a couple of weeks, and our Medical Education Support Officer, who is currently Anne. And then we also have a team in each of the regions, which are made up of a regional rural generalist director of clinical training and a regional rural generalist medical education officer. And then some of the funding that we receive from the Commonwealth is also allocated to the medical simulation team for the medical education unit at WACS to provide simulation education for our RG trainees across the regions. So where do we fit? There seems to be a million different organisations involved in GP training, in particular in rural GP training. So, you know, when you're a medical student, there's your unis and the rural clinical schools. Then when you graduate, WA Health, PMC WA, AMA, and I should say AMA supports you right the way through from student to post-fellowship. And then the WA regional training hubs, and then you've got your vocational training, and then your continuing professional development. Our job is to coordinate and try to smooth things throughout this from graduation to continuing professional development. which, as you can probably imagine, is a big task, and we've only been around now for just over 18 months, but getting some gains. So the Rural Generalist Pathway of WA is here to support you guys as trainees. We hook you up with a Rural Generalist mentor in your region. We provide you with career navigation and support in addition to what you already get from the Rural Clinical School or WAGPET or the college. We help with access to GP suitable rotations during your hospital years, priority access to the WACS education opportunities, so you know, the prompt courses, ALS, those sorts of things, local networking, and we also have RG Pathway trainee only workshops and events. So for example, we have a leadership workshop that currently is postponed, that we would normally run. We have one coming up very soon with Dr. Amy Ems on burnout and burnout proofing. So eligibility criteria, if you're a current doctor and living in rural remote WA, if you're employed by WA Metro Health Service as a medical practitioner with a strong rural background and or relevant rural experience with the future intent to live and practice in a rural remote area as a rural generalist, final year or penultimate year medical student in WA who has rural intent and wants to be a rural generalist, and if you're enrolled in a rural GP training program and working in WA and heading down the rural generalist training path. So if you do want to join us, we will be opening our applications up again very, very soon. In fact, in about 4 weeks' time, which there's the QR code, or you can go to the website. We also, so these are the rural intern rotations that are available next year. WACS is increasing from 20 to 25 intern places with the addition of the new 5 places at Geraldton starting in 2023. Fiona Stanley Hospital has 2 rotations to each Broome, Albany and Northam. Royal Perth has the rotations that you can see there. Sir Charles Gardner has rotations to Geraldton, Headland and Karratha, and Joondalup Health Campus has 2 rotations out to Kalgoorlie. And then after PGY2, there's lots of different opportunities. So direct employment with WACS. So people who have worked with WACS as interns and are then prioritised for PGY2 and 3 if they want to continue. The Rural Junior Doctor Training Innovation Fund. Currently, we have rotations through Pioneer Health in Albany, out of Albany Hospital. We have also the rotation of Broome Hospital into RFDS and CAMS, which is split half the week in each, and Bunbury rotation down to South and West Aboriginal Medical Service. That program is transitioning to the John Flynn Pre-Vocational Doctor Placement Program next year and will be expanding even further over the next few years. And then there's also, comments from your primary employer, primary employing health service, which we discussed before. So if you want any more information about going to work for WACS, then the intern application info evenings on May 12th, and the PMCWA intern application guide, or you can always call the medical education unit and somebody will answer your questions for you. Okay, and that's the rural generalist contact address. And so I'll pass on.
Thanks, Dr. Harwood. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to try and share my screen here. Hopefully you can all see that. Thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. My name is Sonia. I'm from Rural Health West, and I'm going to just quickly touch on who we are and what we can do for you. So our overall aim is to ensure that all rural communities in WA have ready access to qualified and experienced health professionals. We are the leading rural workforce agency for WA, and we're funded by the Australian Government Department of Health and WA Country Health Service. We offer a wide range of support and services. And tonight, I really just want to touch quickly on what we can offer you now as a medical student slash junior doctor, and then if or when you become a GP. So first of all, what can we do for you now? Rural Health West holds a number of educational conferences and workshops held both in Perth and in regional areas of WA each year, some of which your cohort can actually attend and often be sponsored to attend. We work alongside WA's student rural health clubs to provide social and country experiences for students. And I highly recommend you look into them, even if you're on your way out of being a student. The clubs are run by some fantastic committees, and they've got a great lineup for this year. We also provide support to bonded participants to help them complete their return to service obligation. And we provide information and guidance around rural pathways for students and early career health professionals via our Choose Country service. So these are just some examples of activities we run for your cohort throughout the year. We run a few of these scenario-based workshops, which we find are really effective and are run by some very experienced facilitators, and overall are just a really fun time. So what can we do for you as a GP? We provide a free personalised recruitment service for permanent and locum GPs, including the provision of a comprehensive orientation to prepare you for when you move out rural. Again, we've got a lot of PD opportunities relevant to GP around various topics, and we ensure that we bring the opportunities to you rurally. For PD that isn't within your town, we have a scholarship program for you to help you attend CPD, and this program can cover not only registration fees, but also travel and accommodation, which is fantastic. We also have some personal and family support, as we understand that a large component of retention is, it's not only important to support yourselves, but also your families. And lastly, we are a collaborator of the Health Professionals Network, which are present in each one of the WA regions, through which a lot of professional and social events are held throughout the year within many of the rural towns, which is fantastic as well. So look, I don't want to take too much more of your time, but overall, it can be very rewarding to work rurally, as we've already heard tonight. And there is a lot of support for you out there to go rural. So do please get into contact. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. Next, we're going to have Rachel Howden, who's a Senior Program Officer at the Office of the Chief Medical Officer in WA Health, where she'll share with us about opportunities for employment at hospitals during GP training. Over to you, Rachel.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to give you a brief summary of opportunities during your hospital employment to both experience community placement and decide whether GP is for you, and also to assist you in developing and gaining the experience that you'll need in a community general practice. So there's three key programs that will be useful to know about. The first is the community residency program. There is a Metro program, which is run by the Office of the Chief Medical Officer or coordinated by the Office of the Chief Medical Officer, that provides terms to RMOs at Fiona Stanley Hospital, RPH and Sir Charles Gardner Hospital to silver chain, and those terms are in palliative care and in hospital in the home. The second is the community residency program, rural, which is coordinated by WACS, and Abby and Erin might be able to provide you with some information about that. That provides short-term, well-supervised training placements in a variety of rural settings across WA. During placements, RMOs spend a minimum of 20% in a rural setting. For both of those programs, the eligibility is having general registration with the MBA, having an RMO contract at Fiona Stanley Royal Perth or Sir Charles Gardner Hospital, and being an Australian citizen or permanent resident. Both of those programs have separate EOI processes that commence from mid-year, so keep an eye out for those. The other program that is run through our office is the GP Pathway. It's currently in a pilot stage, but we're looking to transition it into business as usual from next year. The GP Pathway commenced in 2020 with the aim of providing a pathway for current and future vocational GP trainees to support their preparation for community general practice. And that was through providing equitable access to suitable clinical experiences, providing access to a suite of GP suitable rotations at each employer that have been identified by WAGPET, the RACGP or ACRIM as providing useful experience prior to entering community GP. It provides the opportunity to gain a broad knowledge of the WA health system and opportunities to develop the confidence, skills and experience required for community general practice. A key element of the pathway is that the rotation should build upon a junior doctor's previous training experience. GP registrar, so vocational GPs on the AGPT, participating on the pilot receive an assessment of their training needs to identify what GP suitable rotations will provide them with optimal preparation for community GP. They get allocated by their employer to a range of GP suitable rotations to meet their training needs over 1 to 2 years. They receive advocacy regarding access to GP suitable rotations, career navigation and mentoring, and the option to undertake a second year of hospital training to complete additional GP suitable rotations. To be eligible for the pilot, you either have to be on the Australian general practice training, or you have to have an interest in future AGPT training within the next 18 months. You've got to be an RMO at a participating health service as well. Since 2020, we've had about 170 participants in the GP pathway. In general, the responses are positive, and 100% of people that responded to a survey would recommend that people do the pilot. So expressions of interest open midway through the year, so from about July onwards. The matrix of rotations, so there's the rotations that are available at each employing health service for members of the pilot will be made available from May. And I'm sorry, I don't have a presentation with links in it, unfortunately, but we will be emailing anyone who has indicated GP intent through MedJobs WA within the last year or two, and we'll also be advertising through our networks. And that's probably it from me.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. I'd now like to invite all of our panelists to pop your cameras back on and join me to help answer some of the questions that have been sent through. So we've got a couple being sent through already, but if anybody who's online has any other questions, now's the time. Please pop them in the Q&A function and we'll get to them. So our first question we've had, Ricky answered as well, but I just want to see if there's anyone else with any experience on the panel. So someone's asked, can you do research as a GP? And Ricky's there with some good information, getting paid to do some research as well. Just wondering if anyone else on the panel has any more information or has any experience in doing research during their GP time. Feel free to pop on your camera and microphone and just speak directly as well.
It's Karen here from RACGP. You certainly can do academic posts as one of your additional skills training. So if that's what you'd like to do, you can certainly apply. And that is funded by the Australian government through the AGPT program, and both ACRM and RACGP would support academic posts.
There's also available through the RACGP Foundation as well for research application for those.
Great, thanks so much. Ricky, did you want to add anything on, just for the people tuning in at home, about your experiences with doing research?
I wondered if I was a little bit crazy doing an academic post because I hated research. And a lot of what I'm doing at the moment is research based, and but I love teaching. So I was like, oh, I'll suck up the research to be able to do the teaching. And I'm now doing a project which is qualitative. So I'm very much a people person, much more than I am a number person. I mean, you can be both, but I've found my niche. I'm really surprised at how much I'm really enjoying getting into qualitative research and interviews. And it's a very different experience to what I thought it would be. And I'm falling in love with the research and finding I have to kick myself out to get home because I'm just a bit engrossed in my work. So I've been quite surprised. Yeah. And have felt very well supported by RACGP to do it. In fact, it's encouraged. Yeah, it's been good.
Great, thank you, Ricky. There's another question on the Q&A from Ben. Thanks for your question, Ben. Just asking, are there any differences in applying for the application, rather, or training for the Defence Force as a GP registrar through the ADF? So, Abby, I know you've responded to him in text, but did you have anything further to add in terms of what you need to be aware of if you're applying to the ADF as a GP registrar?
The main thing I think is that you still need to do normal mainstream general practice, and the way that a lot of people do that is and they'll be working in a private practice in Darwin, or they'll if they're RAF, they're posted here to Pierce and work in one of the nearby practices. So it's a little bit different in that way, but it's still the same application process, etc. It's just how the actual training path works out might be slightly different. Would you agree, Karen?
Yes, I certainly do. I was just typing something. Actually, yeah, in the RACGP, we've recognised the special needs of ADF registrars, and sometimes things are out of your control during training. So we've actually created a special national region, so to speak. From next year, when the college takes back training, we will be able to enable movements by ADF registrars much more easily when they have to be deployed.
Thanks so much for your experience there. Hopefully that answered the question. I've got one for Abby, actually. Just a question about how the Rural Generalist Pathway can help facilitate AGPT trainees navigate the ins and outs of getting into WACS hospitals in order to complete some of their advanced skills or experience required?
It's obviously there's not a one-size-fits-all answer, and that's the whole point behind having individualized career navigation. It's, you know, a lot of it is working out what a person's area of interest is and what region they want to work in eventually, so that we can marry those two things together, and try to, you know, smooth the process as much as possible. There is the possibility of doing slightly split terms. So, for example, say you've done, which is basically what I did in the rural training scheme. I did my obstetrics first, and then went and did my what was basic, advanced and subsequent time in places with supervisors who were also GP obstetricians, and continued to do GP obstetrics under their supervision and guidance throughout the rest of my GP training. And it can be a little bit more complex these days with the way things are set up. But for example, there's been registrars in Kununurra who have done split half and half between the hospital and what is now Woonan Health general practice. There are some places where people have done 0.8 in general practice and 0.2 at the hospital, so 1 day a week with different supervisors. It's very different for different people, and depending on what, you know, how things are in the specific geographic area that the person is going to. But it's possible, and actually not that hard. It's actually, you know, I think that's what most of us do, is we would do a special skills, you know, our advanced skills first, and then incorporate them, or at least do them partway through your RG training.
Thank you. And we've got a question which has already been answered by a few of the panelists, so thank you so much. Just for those listening, just a query regarding what hospital terms junior doctors should aim to do before applying for GP training. And it seems to be the general consensus from a few of our very knowledgeable panelists that breadth is the key. Good grounding in medicine, surgery, potentially paediatrics, obstetrics. If any of the panelists had anything to add to that further, I'm just conscious that you've answered in detail on the Q&A. Thank you so much.
I would just add, you certainly can apply for general practice training from your internship, which means that you would be starting your first year of community general practice as a PGY3. I would really recommend considering doing a registrar job before you go into community general practice. I was a service medical registrar, which I found sort of very challenging as a job, but it was really, really good way for me to develop sort of independent decision-making skills and being confident in managing patients and creating safety nets. And that's something that you don't necessarily get as much experience with as an intern and resident. So I would say sort of consider perhaps adding in a little bit more time so that you can get that experience in the hospital setting, which is a bit better supported, although you do have good support in general practice as well, where you've got the safety net of knowing that your patients are admitted, and if anything doesn't quite go to plan, that can be recognised and acted on early.
Thank you. Very, very helpful insight. Unless there are any more questions from the audience or any closing comments from the panel, may I hand back to Benny.
Thanks, Danushka, and thanks, Britt, for moderating this. Just to wrap up, I would like to thank all our presenters tonight and our sponsor, MDA National. I'd like to thank all the participants for attending tonight. We will email you through some contact details. So if you want to contact any of us here afterwards, do write to us and we will follow up at our end. I'd like to just take this moment to remind you on a few important dates and upcoming events. So first of all, I'm happy to be corrected, but for those who are already working and want to get into the GP training program for 2023, the application is already open, and I believe the closing date for AGPT is next Tuesday. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. Is that that's correct, right? Thank you. We've got a few medical students here. So intern applications open on 9th of May and close on the 9th of June. There'll be various medical student information evenings, which will be hosted virtually. This will run through the first 2 weeks of intern applications and can be found on the PMCWA website and also our slide deck. For the interns and RMOs, their application open on the 20th of May and close on 21st of June. PMCWA is also hosting some career counselling sessions with Dr. Ash Coxon. These will be held on the 18th of May for those of you who do not know what it's like to, or which specialty to go into. On the 26th of May, there will also be a session for those who know which specialty you like to pursue. Once again, PMCWA has a lot more of those information. For those of you in your final years of medical school, we have a special 2-day preparation course called MedVault, so to help you to pass the end of the year exams. For those who are working, we also have the MedCon, which is the Intercollege Medical Conference that brings doctors from every single specialty together. The first time was held last year, and we're going to repeat again this year with a culmination of MedBall. And this is all happening on the 22nd to 23rd of July. And you can see that on the slides now. So once again, thank you everyone for your participation and have a wonderful week. Thank you.